Although his name is Tigri, this stupid, idiotic noble who is weaker than that streamer kid Neon gets captured by the enemy general, and guess what? It's a she, and she's got humongous melons. He decided not to escape and meets other Melonius generals and plans to clap them all until some bad guys start invading his territory and it turns into an all-out brawl with enough melons to start a melon factory by his side. The battle is won or the battle was lost, however you want to see it. It only depends on where you are looking at it from. A young redhead man, clearly from the losers' men who survived the battle by some miracle, was calling out whoever was still alive. He thinks back on the terrible battle. A lady on a horse with silver hair, a blue warrior armor, and big juicy melons bouncing around as she's slicing through her enemies like they're practice dummies in the middle of battle. He refers to her as a war maiden. He looks at his bow and touches his quiver to make sure he's got some arrows left. An enemy on a horse sees the goat who's just standing in the middle of the aftermath like the Tower of Babel, beckoning to be noticed, and charges towards him to send him to his maker. The redhead has other plans as he sends the horse rider to the Shadow Realm but fails to secure the horse like he wanted to. He sees a few other enemies and says he'll take them out. He recognizes the big melon war maiden in their midst and says if he claps her, the others will be too distorted to chase him. He succeeds in taking down 2 horsemen, and when the maiden knows she's under attack, she pulls her sword, longer than Jason Love's rod. She freaking levitated the horses over her head comrades and begins to charge at the lone survivor, who takes out his last 2 arrows and shoots at her but has no luck. This is the definition of shooting your shot at the hot chick, but this time if you miss, you die. She points her sword to him and tells him to put down his weapon. He introduces himself as Tiger Vermud Vorn. That name is plain out weird and a name for disgusting losers, so we'll call him Tiger. The maiden introduces herself as Eleonora Viltaria, a cute name, but we'll call her Nora. Nora says from now on, he's her property. Tiger is woken by a lady with melons as big as watermelons and a rather milk-colored hair. She stuck a sword in his mouth, waking him from a very sound sleep, where he dreams of his fellow soldiers and learnt about a battle royal going on in the palace. He's also royalty, and the other royalties despise him because he uses a bow and not a sword. The milk-haired maiden is amazed by the fact that this cow was so comfortable sleeping in a cell that she had to stick a sword down his throat to wake him up. In my digression, she could have stuck a melon down his throat instead. She takes him to Nora and they explain that while he was asleep, a memo had already been sent to his kingdom to pay a ransom that's 3 times their annual budget or something, or value. Knowing his broken and poor kingdom cannot pay that much, he tells her that she should tone down the ransom, but she says if it's not paid in 50 days, she'll own his ugly face and the entirety of his being. Nora tells him to entertain her with his shooting skills. He plays around at first, but when she's shot at, he displays his genius by shooting the foot of the person who tried to murder Nora from a distance that only a sniper with a very good scope and eyesight could pull, much like the Turkish guy who won the silver medal for the shooting competition in Paris Olympic 2024. Nora apologized to him later because a few of her people gave him a useless bow to disgrace while he was shooting. She says she'll have them beheaded, but he begs otherwise. He bows his head towards her and she shoves her melons all in his face, juggling them like water balloons. He's flustered, pulls back and asks what's so special about the shooting practice. They tell him that they fell in love with him immediately. They saw his ugly face. He's shocked, and I'm about to show you something out of line. If you pause episode 1 at about 13:24, you'll see just how crazy Nora's melons are, and you'll also get to watch her balance them again. Shall we name a Meloneer for this anime too? She also tells him that she didn't take him for ransom, she found him entertaining. That battle was gruesome for her enemies, but for her it was rather boring as they soon fled when their most fierce warrior was taken down. But she was swept off her feet when she found him still fighting, and she saw his ugly face. She liked him for his courage. The milk-haired war maiden was standing behind, pouting like a cougar, and whoever angled this anime caught her melons so well. Apparently, when they found him, the milk-haired lady was part of the people he shot down first. She introduced herself as Militia Alicia, and for us, Militia would do just fine. It's pronounced Maylisha. Nora wonders why he has that ugly name Tigrevermood tagged along with his ugly face. She also asks him to be her subordinate, but he turns her down. He's got a kingdom of his own called Alsace, and he must protect it as its ruler. Walking the halls, he tells a guy with a head as shiny as that of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson to keep his hair instead of reflecting sunlight everywhere he goes with his big head. The big head turns around in gratitude and in admiration of his shooting skills. His name is Rurik. You know what we're going to call him already. They sat together and Tiger's taste buds were blessed with dinner. Next day, he teaches the archers in the kingdom, and when he's done and going to bathe in a secret stream, he finds a baby dragon and admires it. He hears a voice say it's hers, and he turns and sees Nora naked and taking her bath. The shameless Bleach stands up and says she's not ashamed and actually wants him, and to finish her statement, I'll say she wants him to clap her into Cloud 9, but he turns around and apologizes for invading her privacy. The shameless virgin couldn't get the sight of her melons and her glorious body canvas away from his mind. His mind-clapping session is interrupted as Rick tells him they captured one of his kin. He goes and sees it's his longtime servant Bertrand, who comes beating bad news that the kingdom of Alsace is under attack. In the absence of their ruler, a kingdom has arisen to take over the town of Alsace with nothing less than 3,000 soldiers, and as if that number of soldiers does not already outnumber the total number of citizens in Alsace, 2 dragons were sent alongside. A yet-to-be-identified noble that looks like a king gorilla sent his son to take over the land of Alsace. Meanwhile, Tiger was facing Nora, who's not letting him leave. He scans through her clothes, noticing her twists and curves. She points him out by saying she wore those clothes just so she could watch his ugly face ogle at her. He should just admit he wants to clap her. If I ever land in an anime, I'll most definitely be the clapping protagonist. Tiger flashes back to the time he saw her bathing and quickly snaps out of it before his Excalibur ruins everything for him. Speaking of Excaliburs, the 2024 Olympics was so eventful. Did you hear the news of a man's pole vaulting career ruined by his own Excalibur? Now back to the anime, he has a heart-to-heart with Nora with her sword drawn and pointing to him. She gives the feminine hints that men never understand, but the dumb monkey catches on and asks for her help in defending his kingdom, but in return she says she'll take over the kingdom. Not long after, they ride to the town of Alsace, and on the way, Nora thinks back on her conversation with Militia. They both pegged him wrong, and every time he decides, his decisions shock them. Speak of the devil, and he appeared, and Nora smiled as bright as the sun. He was in his normal attire, and they felt he should at least do something to his hair. They ambushed his hair, and for a second there, his ugliness reduced a little. The virgin never misses the chance to admire her curves and clap her in his mind, and she never misses the chance to tease him for looking at her like he wants to rip off her clothes and clap her aggressively. He agrees with her and says he thinks she's the most beautiful woman he has met since they met on the battlefield. Nora snaps back into reality and asks Tiger if they've got any chance at winning the battle with their 1,000 soldiers facing off against the enemy's 3,000 soldiers. He assures her that he's got the perfect strategy to get the job done. Dawn breaks and the enemies match slowly just so they look cool. Expose the plot. 2 nobles conspire to take the crown off the head of the king and put it on one of their heads. The people of Alsace, on the other hand, have begun to take shelter in the woods and in the religious shrine, except Tita, who's staying back. Who's Tita? You may ask. She's Lord Tiger's maid and has decided to wait for her master no matter how ugly it gets. She goes to the hose and sees a black bow with some series, and she remembers her young master the morning before he left for battle. In the flashback, they converse and talk lead to talk, and she said he should let her say goodbye to him the usual way, and I squint my eyes. What is this usual goodbye? The enemies have raided the towns and are celebrating victory already, but it feels too easy, and the leader, Zion, decided to go into the mansion. He meets the maid at the staircase, and she tells him to take his ugly and wretched face out of the mansion. He pulls his sword and tears through her gown, exposing her tiny melons. He teases her for being in love with her master. He trips her to fall and gets all over her. He was about to grab her tiny melons, but an arrow came out of nowhere and hit his hand away. The shock of this left mortified him for seconds before he began to scream. Tiger told her to jump down so he'd catch her, but as soon as she jumped, someone intercepted his horse. He had to jump from on top of it like a classic superhero and catch her in the air. Nora breaks their fall down with wind, and the ugly bastard realizes that Nora can control the wind with her sword. She tells him her power comes from the sword and says the name of the sword is Arifar. Immediately she called the name. A gust of wind surrounded Tiger, and Nora said the sword likes him. It's only a matter of time before he claps the air spirit too. LOL. Tita cries to him, saying she couldn't leave the mansion because he told her to take care of it and she believed he'll be back. He hugs her and wipes her tears away. Nora says she's jealous and asks him if that's the kind of girl he wants. She pulls back and asks who these strange people were, but that's not the important thing here. I'm gonna be detailed about this one. As she asks the question, Tiger notices the sun reflection hit the head of an arrow right before the shooter releases it. Tiger catches the arrow with his bare hands, and in a matter of milliseconds, he sends it back to the shooter like the usual Christian prayer, "Back go sender." The arrow goes back like a sniper's bullet and meets the bullseye. This amazes everyone, but this didn't come without a cost. He injured his hand, Tita cut a part of her torn gown and wrapped up the wounded hand. He was about to take off into battle with the rest, but then he noticed that his bow was bad from the last arrow he shot. Tita offers him a black arrow that I feel should have a cool name like the Black Mamba, the Penetrator, the Eyes of Death, or something in the lines of the End of Days, if it's a doomsday bow. The War Maiden's army had just handed Zion's forces a serious beatdown in Alsace, routing 300 soldiers like they were nothing more than fodder enemies in a shonen anime. But despite the victory, Nora's mood was as tense as a final exam in My Hero Academia, the kind where if you fail, it's game over. The reason? The rest of Zion's army, 2,700 weak, was nowhere to be found. It was like taking down a boss in a dungeon only to find out the real boss was still lurking in the shadows, ready to pounce. Nora's concern was understandable. Zion's army, though slightly bruised, still had the numbers to overwhelm them. Want to know the most standout thing in their meeting? It's Rick's son reflecting Moon Wannabe head. According to Tiger, Zion and his forces had probably slithered away to the Molsheim plains to lick their wounds. Nora saw this as the perfect opportunity to strike while the enemy was down, because nothing says winning strategy like kicking your opponent while they're trying to put their armor back on. Zion was having a mental breakdown that could rival that of Light Yagami when he was battling L. The arrival of the War Maiden and her army had him confused like me when I loosely watched AOT Season 3. With dragons by his side, Zion was ready to dish out some hardcore revenge. Think of it as Sasuke finally coming face to face with Itachi, and you get the idea of how much tension was in the air. The two armies, with their battle strategies, finally clashed at the plain fields. It was like the Naruto and Sasuke battle at the Valley of the End, except with more medieval weaponry and, well, very useless dragons. Tiger and the War Maiden's army managed to push back the first wave of Zion's soldiers until an Earth Dragon showed up, halting their advance like a boss monster that appeared out of nowhere in a JRPG. The sight of the dragon had the War Maiden's army frozen in place, probably thinking, "We did not sign up for this level of DLC." But this wasn't Nora's first rodeo. With the confidence of Saitama from One Punch Man, she took on the dragon solo. Hey, why don't I call it sneak peeks? I'll tell you an amazing place to pause the scene in every episode. So here goes. Sneak peek at 11 o'clock, just stop and admire the angle and the size of those beautiful juicy melons. The battlefield went silent after that amazing strike. The kind of silence that happens right before a crowd goes wild after an over-the-top Dragon Ball fight. Even Tiger was left speechless, having just witnessed Nora pull off a move that would make Urza Scarlet from Fairy Tail proud. On the other side, Zion the monkey was having a rough time. Not only had he lost his prize dragon, but he also realized that 2,000 reinforcements had just arrived to join the battle. What Zion didn't know was that the reinforcements were nothing more than a clever illusion. Tiger had used the sunset to cast shadows, making a mere 100 soldiers and a bunch of horses look like an entire army. It was a strategy you'd get out of Naruto x Eren. Militia and Rick with the shiny head were busy playing a deadly game of bait and switch. Their fake retreat worked like a charm, luring some of Zion's soldiers into a trap. With the War Maiden's army closing in from all sides, Zion and his remaining forces found themselves surrounded. Zion, apparently missing the classes on morality, resolved that people were just plants that regrow themselves, earning him a look of utter disgust from Nora. Tiger, channeling his inner Kirito from Sword Art Online, vowed never to forgive Zion for his actions. Zion challenged Tiger to a duel. Tiger accepted. The first 3 shots from Tiger's bow were blocked by Zion's shield, but as Zion charged forward, Tiger unleashed a 4th arrow that pierced through the shield. At the same spot, the first 3 arrows hit. Just as Tiger prepared to fire a 5th arrow, both armies intervened. Zion, realizing he was outmatched, attempted to flee on his dragon, flying high above the battlefield where Nora's wind couldn't reach him. That's when Tiger heard it, a voice from the black bow urging him to shoot. It was like when Gon first realized the true potential of his power in Hunter x Hunter. Confused but trusting his instincts, Tiger drew an arrow, and with the wind from Nora's Aerofar aiding him, he fired. The arrow shot forward at blinding speed, slicing through the air like a bleach Zanpakuto, and struck both Zion and his dragon in mid-flight. Nora roared Tiger's victory to the heavens. The remaining Thenardier army scattered like grunts in a one-piece arc after Luffy unleashes his haki. Tida's morning routine of waking up Tiger had become as regular as the sunrise. However, today's wake-up call was far from ordinary. As Tida goes into Tiger's room, she finds Nora already there, on top of Tiger like she was giving his Excalibur a good ride and her sword in his mouth. It was an epic saw scene. Tida yelled at the top of her voice, channeling her inner Rem from ReZero, and immediately scolded Nora. Nora tells them she'll soon depart for her hometown. The duo decided to head out to the outskirts of Alsace, specifically to Hunawir village, where Tiger could finally breathe easy seeing the villagers safe and sound. It was like that feeling in Attack on Titan when you realize the walls are still holding, for now. Sneak peek at 302, who should we name the Melanier. If you don't know who the Melanier is, it's the character with larger, convincingly juicy melons. So who should we name the Melanier? What do you think? Meanwhile, over in Rance, the city where Zion came from, Thenardier, his father was having a meltdown that would make even Frieza blush. Zion's death had hit him hard, and he was ready to unleash every cheat code in his arsenal, more soldiers, dragons, and even summoning a war maiden to fight another war maiden. In Silesia, Nora arrived at the Imperial Castle for her meeting with the king. Seeing her in that dress just made her 10x sumptuous. The old king wasn't thrilled about Nora's unsanctioned trip to Brune to battle Zion's army. He was ready to lay down the law unless Nora had a really good explanation, like the fate of the world depends on it kind of good. Nora explained that she was hired by Tiger to protect Alsace. Victor was less than impressed. He was almost disgusted if he wasn't, but before things could escalate into a full-blown trial, Sophia Obertus made her grand entrance. All debates for the Melanier just paused and a new contestant just strolled in, Sophia. And for her debut, Sneak Peek 706 does it justice. After the meeting, Nora bumped into Ludmila Luri, a Farsi little lady with sizable rice cakes for melons with a blue hair and a nasty attitude, and what followed was an argument that could only be described as a crossover between Death Note's Light and L. A battle of wits, but with more sass and indirect jests at melon sizes. Just when things were about to get really heated, Sophia stepped in again, and it's safe to say that with the size of things, I might just be forced to name her the Melanier. During a private chat with Sophia, Nora was taken aback to learn that Ludmila, despite her hatred for Thenardier, had been one of his longtime associates. Back in Alsace, Tiger had a tense reunion with Mashas, who, along with Militia, demanded an explanation from Tiger. After some explanation, Mashas realized he had jumped to conclusions and apologized to Militia. With the air cleared, Tiger revealed his plan to take on both Thenardier and Ganelon with Mashas by his side. As Tiger and Militia made their way to the Kikimora mansion of Vosia's mountains, they reunited with Nora, who had some news from her king. It was a mixed bag. Jikted would back Tiger, but only if it was in their best interest, and oh yeah, some of the other war maidens might be coming after him. As Nora casually mocked Ludmila, Ludmila herself burst into the room. On their journey to Rodnik, Ludmila dropped a bombshell. As one of Thenardier's allies, she believed Tiger didn't stand a chance against his enemies. Before Tiger could respond, they were ambushed by the Seven Chains assassins. The group managed to take out the initial attackers, but Militia was hit by a venomous snake from above. It bit her right on her melons, and sneak peek at 2016, she's got really perky melons, leaving Nora in shock. With Militia poisoned and the group surrounded, Tiger pulled a move straight out of a fan service heavy anime. Sucking the venom out from Militia's right melon and sneak peek at 2031, look at the grip he's got on the left melon. Just as the situation looked grim, Ludmila unleashed her ice powers, and that reminds me of his death from Akame ga Kill, wiping out the assassins with chilling efficiency. After the dust settled, Ludmila wasted no time mocking Nora, calling her unfit to be a war maiden for getting emotional over her subjects. It was like Vegeta taunting Goku for letting his emotions get in the way of a good fight. Ludmila heads off to get help. In the steamy, mist-filled bath of Rodnik, the scene was set for what could have easily been an episode of High School DxD, except this time there were no angels or demons, just Nora and Melisha soaking in the hot water. Melisha took a moment to express her gratitude to everyone for saving her. Meanwhile, Tiger, who I don't suspect is a virgin, found himself in the wrong place at the wrong time. Again, he accidentally stumbled upon Ludmila, who was in the middle of bath. She jumped out of her bath and picked her weapon. From the expression on his face, we know that small body and her rice cake melons aren't moving anyone. She knocks him out anyway. To make amends for his accidental peeping, Tiger decided to treat Ludmila to some soup at Rodnik's marketplace. Ludmila accepted the gesture, but there was no mistaking the mischievous glint in her eye. As Ludmila left, Nora turned to Melisha, her expression suddenly serious, and instructed her to dispatch the troops to Leitmeritz. As Nora predicted, Ludmila was already on the move, leading her troops toward Leitmeritz with the precision of a one-piece admiral. Meanwhile, Thénardier was gearing up for yet another attack on Alsace. Even though Tiger sent an envoy with a peace treaty hoping to avoid further bloodshed, Ludmila dismissed it faster than Goku, turning down a chance to study. She was determined to go through with her attack, despite her generals voicing their concerns. The clash between Ludmila's forces and Nora's army resulted in hundreds of casualties, leaving both sides bloodied but unbowed. Realizing that a direct confrontation wouldn't lead to victory, Nora decided to take the fight to Ludmila's doorstep, Tatra Castle nestled in the treacherous mountains. The Silver Wind War Maiden was ready to lay siege, but nature had other plans. The weather turned against them, with biting winds and snowstorms making the already formidable Tatra Castle even more impregnable. Nora's army had to pull back, but Nora, in true Attack on Titan fashion, wasn't about to give up. She insisted on attacking again, determined to take down Ludmila no matter the cost. Tiger suggested a different approach. Rather than a full frontal assault, he proposed scouting the mountains for a shortcut that could give them the upper hand. A classic Hunter x Hunter move. Think your way around the problem instead of charging in head first. He discourages her and tells her to give him time to scout. He puts on a bear skin and we hear Melisha say something nice to him. She muttered that he was cute. During his scouting mission, Tiger had a chance encounter with Ludmila, who was out hunting a fox. It was one of those unexpected meetings. Tiger and Ludmila chatted under the cover of night, their conversation flowing easily as they shared the quiet moments before dawn. But as the sun began to rise, Ludmila departed, leaving Tiger with more than just fond memories. He had a trail to follow, literally. Tiger tracked Ludmila's footprints back to Tatra Castle. With this newfound information, Nora and her army made their move. They followed Tiger's shortcut through the mountains, only to find that Ludmila had tightened the castle's security. It was like sneaking into a boss dungeon in an RPG, only to find out the boss had added extra traps while you were gone. Nora tried to break through the castle gates, but it was no use. The defenses were too strong, and the archers lying in ambush were ready to turn any intruders into pincushions. Just when things were looking bleak, Tiger swooped in, saving Nora from a deadly barrage of arrows. Realizing they needed more firepower, Tiger called upon Arifar, asking the sword to lend its wind power to break the gate. With Tiger's arrows and Nora's wind working in perfect harmony, they unleashed a combined attack that shattered the castle gates in a spectacular display of force. It was like witnessing a Dragon Ball Z fusion attack. With the gates breached, Nora rallied her troops, leading the charge into Tatra Castle. The battle for the fortress had begun. The battle within the stone walls of Tatra Fortress raged on, with Nora and Ludmila clashing in a flurry of steel and magic that felt like a scene straight out of Bleach. Sparks flew as their swords met. Okay, I'm being overly poetic. Each blow was like a raging thunder. Everyone could feel their relentless hits. It was a contest of sheer will and power, Nora's wind slicing through the air with deadly precision, while Ludmila's low-quality as death ice power was also powerful. Even though it was low quality compared to as death, and it could have made even Grey Fullbuster from Fairy Tail Shiver. But just as things were heating up or cooling down, depending on your perspective, an unexpected guest arrived to crash the party. The last of the Seven Chains assassins made his dramatic entrance as if he was auditioning for a role in Naruto, trying to steal the spotlight with his menacing presence. However, Tiger was having none of it. With a swift movement faster than you could say Bankai, Tiger sent an arrow flying straight into the assassin's heart and sent him to whence his fellow men went, ending the threat before it even began. The assassin crumpled to the ground, and all eyes turned to Tiger. Ludmila, catching sight of Tiger's black bow and recognizing the unique style of his shot, had a sudden epiphany. Wait a minute, you're Tigers?" she exclaimed, her mind piecing together the puzzle like it was a dramatic twist, like the moment when Light Yagami's true identity was revealed in Death Note. Tiger, who was caught off guard by her reaction, could only nod sheepishly, scratching the back of his head as if he were Hinata from Haikyuu, getting caught with a volleyball he wasn't supposed to have. She asked him why he didn't wait for the assassin to assassinate her. Men! So much ASS, but she's got none, not even melons to compensate. Impressed by Tiger's sincerity and his prowess in battle, Ludmila made a decision that would change the course of the war. She announced her neutrality, effectively ending the battle for Tatra Fortress. It was like that moment in Dragon Ball Z, when Vegeta, after much stubbornness, finally agreed to fight alongside Goku. The dust settled and the battlefield grew quiet, with Nora and Tiger sharing a brief relieved glance. But while they had earned a reprieve, the world around them was still in turmoil. Elsewhere, the legendary Roland, leader of the Navarre Knights, was in the middle of a politics that looked like something out of Berserk. His sword sliced through the ranks of the Sackstein army like butter, leaving nothing but devastation in his wake. Roland was a force of nature. No, Roland was a force of utter disaster, as unstoppable as Saitama from One Punch Man, and the enemy didn't stand a chance. But just when it seemed like the day was won, a letter arrived, bearing the seal of Brune. Roland's expression darkened as he read its contents. The letter sent on behalf of Farron ordered Roland to return to Brune immediately and to kill Tiger. It was the kind of plot twist that would make even Lelouch from Code Geass raise an eyebrow. A month passed since the dust had settled in Olmutz, and during that time, Tiger's influence had grown exponentially. His once small band of fighters had swelled into an army of 5,000 men, with Hughes and Nora by his side as his closest allies. The coalition army, now named the Silver Meteor Army, a name that Malika disputes because it sounds childish, but nonetheless, the soldiers were ready to make its mark on the battlefield, led by the quartet of Tiger, Nora, Militia, and Hughes. They were like the Avengers of medieval fantasy, each bringing their unique skills to the fight. But wouldn't it be crazy if an anime pulled an Avengers Assemble? In true anime fashion, the plot didn't give Tiger a moment's peace. One night, while Tiger was trying to catch some much-needed rest on a nearby hill, he was rudely interrupted by Looney, Nora's pet dragon, who flew overhead with the kind of speed you'd expect from Attack on Titan's 3D maneuver gear. And then, because no good deed goes unpunished, Sophie, in all her glorious skin canvas and completely unprepared splendor, burst out of a tree with all her business outside. She shamelessly ran towards Tiger and tripped over Tiger and tumbled down onto him, plunging her miraculously huge and amazing savory melons onto him. The sneak peek of this episode is from 12:48 to 13. 14. Nora burst out of the tree too, but she was fully clothed. Back at the camp, the mood turned somber as Sophie delivered some bad news and a bomb-ass plot twist. After taking a good look at his portrait and noticing how ugly his face is, Brune had officially labeled Tiger a traitor, all thanks to Pierre Badouin's declaration. His title as a Brune noble had been revoked, and Alsace was now under Brune's control. The news hit Tiger like a ton of bricks, and for a moment he looked as though he had just been dealt a critical hit by a Dark Souls boss. But Sophia, ever the voice of reason, reminded him that the other War Maiden hadn't made any moves yet. This wasn't game over, it was just another challenge to overcome. Determined to protect his homeland and his people, Tiger steeled himself for the battles to come. The Silver Meteor Army was ready, and so was he. The next battle took place on the sprawling fields of Orange Plains, where the Silver Meteor Army clashed with the Navarre Knights in an epic confrontation. Roland, living up to his fearsome reputation, decimated the enemy ranks with a strength that seemed almost inhuman. He was slashing through them like they were headless chickens running around, but his mind was blown when for the first time in a century, his sword was stopped, and at that, it was a lady. Nora found herself locked in a fierce duel with Roland, their swords clashing with such intensity that it seemed like the earth itself might split apart. But Roland's power was overwhelming, and Nora struggled to hold her ground. Just as it seemed that Nora was about to fall, Tiger arrived, his entrance as timely as Kirito swooping in to save Asuna. With a quick calculated move, Tiger fired an arrow that arced through the sky, striking Roland's horse with pinpoint accuracy. Roland, thinking the shot had missed, charged after them, only to watch in shock as his horse crumpled beneath him with the arrow embedded deep in its head. It was a moment of triumph, but the victory was short-lived. As Nora began to celebrate, she realized that Tiger was severely injured, his body battered from the battle. To make matters worse, the Navarre Knights were closing in, their formation unbroken despite the loss of their leader's mount. The situation looked dire, and wait. With the power vested in me, I now declare Sophia the Melanie. She appeared, her presence as unexpected as a sudden power-up in the middle of a boss fight. She urged Nora to take Tiger and escape while she confronted the Navarre Knights on her own. Sophie and Roland were at it like true warriors. He used his sword to slash through her light barrier like it was paper. Sophie knew that her job wasn't to win, but to buy precious time for Nora and Tiger's escape. For a brief, intense moment, she traded blows with the legendary Black Knight, her spells colliding with his immense strength, and it was like watching Natsu from Fairy Tail go up against Laxus. Sparks flew, the ground shook, but neither side was willing to back down, and just when it seemed like Sophie might be overwhelmed, she pulled a move that would make Yoruichi Shihoin from Bleach proud. In a flash of light, she teleported out of the fray, leaving Roland blinking in surprise. As the battle aura settled and the realization set in that Sophie was gone, Roland made a decision that showed why he was a Knight of Honor. Hearing the rumbling of incoming cavalry, Mashus and his 300 soldiers galloping like the Rohan riders from Lord of the Rings, Roland ordered his troops to abandon the chase. It wasn't out of fear, but rather a calculated move. He knew another confrontation was inevitable. Back at the Silver Meteor Army's camp, the mood was tense. Mashus, who had ridden hard to reach them, delivered news that was as grim as any they had heard. The discovery in Nice, relayed by Baduin, was more horrifying than anyone had imagined. King Faron's health had deteriorated to the point where the other ministers were circling like vultures, ready to tear the kingdom apart. But you and I know those two dukes are behind this all. Mashas recounted how Sophie had saved his life in the capital, fending off assassins like a scene straight out of a Kamiga kill, leaving everyone with a newfound respect for the mysterious war maiden. Later, Nora visited Tiger, who was still recovering from his injuries. With a steely resolve that reminded Tiger of Mikasa from Attack on Titan, she promised him that they would win this war. With allies like Sophie and Mashas by their side, Nora was determined to lead them to victory. Meanwhile, Olivier reported the various rumors circulating about the Duke's supposed betrayal. Despite knowing the truth, Roland's sense of duty as Farron's knight remained unwavering. He would fulfill his mission, no matter the cost. The following day, the Silver Meteor Army launched yet another assault against the Navarre Knights, but this time they found themselves on the back foot. The Navarre Knights employed the Crescent Moon formation, a tactic as deadly as it was elegant, slicing through the Silver Meteor Army like Sephiroth's sword through a helpless NPC. Tiger awoke from his slumber. He asked his bow for powers, and it glowed like it was powering up Super Saiyan style. With Tita, Tiger embarked on a journey to uncover the source of the bow's power. Their search led them to a mysterious and ominous temple within a nearby bush. The place had an air of foreboding, like Castlevania, and Tita explained that the temple belonged to Tir Nafal, the goddess of night, darkness, and death. As they ventured deeper into the temple, the atmosphere grew heavier. The goddess herself possessed Tita. The goddess tested his resolve, challenging his will to protect Alsace and Tita. With the determination of a hero from Sword Art Online, he powered up his arrow and shot at possessed Tita. Tiger managed to free Tita from Tir Nafal's grasp without harming her. Meanwhile, the battle outside was taking a dramatic turn. The tides began to shift in favor of the Silver Meteor Army when Militia's unit executed a brilliant ambush. The Navarre Knights found themselves trapped in a treacherous mud pool, their once mighty formation broken and vulnerable. Nora and Sophie, displaying the kind of teamwork you'd expect from Naruto and Sasuke, fought fiercely against Roland, but even their combined might couldn't bring down the Black Knight. Just as Roland was about to deliver the finishing blow, an arrow whistled through the air, intervening at the last possible moment. Tiger, despite his injuries, had returned to the battlefield, his eyes locked onto Roland. It was a moment straight out of Gurren Lagann, where sheer willpower was enough to turn the tide of battle. Roland, recognizing Tiger's resolve, confronted him about the incident in Alsace. Tiger admitted that the rumors were true and that he had indeed hired the War Maiden to protect his home. Even when Nora offered to join forces to defeat Thénardier, Roland refused. He is bound to his duty as Farron's knight, and that leaves him no choice but to continue the fight. Despite his injuries, Tiger notched another arrow and unleashed its power toward Roland. The shot was so charged with energy that it was like watching Ichigo fire a Getsuga Tensho, but Roland, with a strength that seemed almost superhuman, deflected the arrow. The resulting explosion sent both Tiger and the War Maiden flying, but in a surprising twist that would have even Attack on Titan fans gasping, Roland's hands were too numb to continue, he admitted defeat. If you like the video, make sure to check out one of these other two right here. Also, if you want to see the full plot-filled version, no restrictions, just subscribe to our Patreon in the description below.